On behalf of the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies, we welcome you to our Wednesday lecture series. We're pleased to welcome Mr. Julius Anderegg, who is the Consul General for Switzerland, based at the Swiss Consulate in San Francisco. Unfortunately, at the very last minute, Ambassador Manuel Sager suffered some health concerns and was unable to make the trip from Washington. He deeply regrets this, and we hope to have him visit and lecture to us at another time. But we are very pleased to welcome Consul General Anderegg with us today and look forward to his comments and his remarks to you. As you know, our lectures are video recorded and podcast, and so your attendance today is your permission to use your likeness or your voice. We are also broadcasting live on BYU's Sirius XM channel, and you can access this and all of the other video lectures on our website at kennedy.byu.edu or on our iTunes channel. We would encourage you to join the conversation if you're tweeting and using the hashtag KennedyLive, and you can also find other information about this and upcoming lectures. If I may, this Thursday, tomorrow, at 11 a.m. in this room, we'll be welcoming His Excellency Harold Winston Forsyth, the Peruvian ambassador to the United States, who will be speaking on Peru-U.S. relations. So a busy week. I should also mention that next week we'll be hosting Susan Sharp, who is the Boren Awards Program Director with the Institute of International Education in Washington, D.C., and she'll be providing a workshop at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, the 18th of September. For those of you who are interested in careers in national security, this is a great opportunity to learn about the Boren Awards, which are available for both undergraduate and graduate students and provide a significant amount of funding to help support your language and international learning. One other announcement, if I may. I'm just curious, by way of information, how many of you have been to Switzerland already? Oh, very good. How many of you speak French? A little bit of a different skew. And how many of you have spent some time in Europe? Fabulous. So it gives us a sense of who our audience is today. We would like to begin our lecture today with an opening prayer, as is our custom. We've asked Ben Forsgren, who is a geography major from Wilmington, North Carolina, to do that. And then I'll be pleased to turn the time over to Dan Oswald, who is the Honorary Consul for Switzerland here in Utah, and he will introduce the Consul General. So Ben, and then Dan.
Our Father in heaven, we thank Thee for the opportunity we have to enjoy the day that Thou hast prepared for us today. We thank Thee for this campus that we have to gather to be educated and edified by Thee. We thank Thee for the opportunity we have to attend this lecture today and for the opportunity we have to learn and have our minds expand to the international world around us. We ask that as the speaker gives his message today, that Thy Spirit will be with him to impart the message that he has prepared, and that we will be able to be edified and uplifted by it and be able to expand our horizons. In addition, Father, we ask for a blessing upon all those who are in need of Thy Spirit and Thy comfort, and we do this humbly in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
As the Honorary Consul of Switzerland in Salt Lake City, Utah, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Julius F. Anderegg. Before doing so, I would like to just again express the regrets that Ambassador Manuel Sager is sending. He actually slipped a disc, and he then that morning yesterday morning when he was supposed to board a plane, he just couldn't actually walk, and something similar happened to him last January, and therefore he was not able to join us today. But he said in German, it says, Aufgehoben ist nicht aufgeschoben, or aufgeschoben ist nicht aufgehoben, meaning basically that just because it's postponed doesn't mean it's canceled. So he hopes to come back sometime soon. Mr. Anderegg and his lovely wife, Ursula Anderegg, are both here today. And they've had a wealth of experience traveling and living all across the world. And you see this world map, so maybe you can figure out where they've all been or point to those places. But he spent his youth in the Swiss ski resort of Klosters. That's where he grew up. So he's an avid skier and a great skier. He studied business administration in Switzerland and also in New York City at Columbia University and CUNY. And then also he got a master's degree in political sciences from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He joined the Swiss ministry many years ago, 35 years ago in 1977, subsequently served as a foreign service officer in Barcelona. Now you can start doing your test. New York as a commercial attaché, in Baghdad, in Copenhagen, deputy head of the embassy there, in Bern, as a political, in the political directorate, also in Geneva as deputy director of EFTA, in Vienna as chairman of OSCE's Committee for Financial and Economic Affairs, in New York, diplomatic counselor there, as well as with the Swiss UN delegation, in Karachi as the Consul General, in Frankfurt as the Consul General, and since September of 2009 as Consul General in San Francisco. Mr. Anderegg is married to Ursula Anderegg, and they have a son and a daughter who will actually join them on Friday, so they can also experience some of the beauties of central and southern Utah. It is my pleasure to welcome my friend, Mr. Anderegg.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I have to take this a little bit down because the Swiss are shorter than the average Utah. Let me just very briefly say how happy I am to be in Utah again for the third time. And actually, I was very happy to hear, Corey, that was a great idea to find out who has traveled to Switzerland and who has traveled to Europe. I saw almost a match there because, you know, we like to say travel through Europe and rest in Switzerland. And it seems that this is what some of you have done. Now, Winston Churchill had a habit of falling asleep when somebody else was speaking. And I recall one quote that one of the members of parliament got very angry when he fell asleep while he was speaking. So he shouted at him, "Mr. Churchill, do you must fall asleep while I'm speaking?" And Churchill, he woke up and said, "No, but it's purely voluntary." I hope you can bear with me for 20 minutes or so. I have here my Swiss watch to make sure that I don't break any rules, Corey. I would like to give you first a little snapshot or portrait of Switzerland. And I will also try to explore some commonalities with our big sister country of the United States, and also where we have actually partnerships and very good cooperation. Now, in a snapshot, one thing that I always, I'm saying the same thing at Berkeley University or Stanford University when I had the privilege to speak about Switzerland. If you want to understand one thing about Switzerland, is that the country has been built from the bottom up, politically mainly, and there are many answers to Swiss political life that can be derived from that simple fact. There are countries, wonderful countries, that have been built, constructed from the top down, and you also can see that reflected in today's political culture. You also perhaps would like to recall that Switzerland has a tradition of direct democracy, which is working very well, we think. There are ups and downs. Sometimes the outcome of direct democratic processes are not what the government would like to see. But generally speaking, we consider this to be one of the secrets of the stability and of the success of Swiss political and economic life. I give you one example for direct democracy. Just 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, we have submitted to the people, to the voters of Switzerland, a proposal from the leftern sphere of the political landscape that we should have 2 weeks more vacation, all Swiss. And we already have, average 4 weeks of vacation, so that is also a lot compared with what I see in the United States. But the people, this is of course a very, juicy proposition, but the proposal was defeated by a 2-to-1 margin, so a clear rejection. It's also a reflection that proposed direct democratic procedures work very well if the government takes an effort to explain the consequences of certain proposals. So I don't want to prolong this, point, but direct democratic procedures is one element that you want to remember if you are asked about small Switzerland. We also, I think also you want to remember maybe that Switzerland has no natural resources. So actually the human resources is all that we have. We also have water, but that's, I think, also an important aspect. We are rich in water, which becomes more and more important. But we export it free of charge to Germany and Italy and Austria and as well. But actually, maybe we could consider exporting the whole River Rhine. Now, the trust in the leadership is more or less intact, we can say. The people always have the opportunity to intervene if the government comes with stupid propositions, or even parliament. Even parliament can be overridden by the popular vote if the majority is unhappy. By the way, we have a good exchange on direct democracy with California, with Oregon, and actually in a few weeks I will be up in Seattle, Washington State. These are states that also have direct democratic traditions. Switzerland sometimes is perceived as fiercely independent, a mountain fortress or a giant bank vault. The reality is we have banks, yes, that's true, but Switzerland actually is one of the most globalized and innovative countries in the world. We have 10% of the Swiss live abroad, compared to the United States with 2%. I'm sure you probably make already 1.5% of the 2%. 23% of the Swiss population is foreign-born, compared with the United States, 14%. That's also a lot for a big country like the United States. And of course, we all recognize and we admire that the United States has such a great tradition of welcoming the best and also many refugees. But you wouldn't think of Switzerland in the same manner. And so you have 23% foreign-born in Switzerland, 14% in the United States. Every other Swiss franc is earned outside our country. We have a very international economy. We have 3 cultures, we can say. 3 major European cultures are part of a Swiss identity. And we have 4 languages within our small country. And don't forget, Switzerland is a very small country. Switzerland has been ranked number 1 in the global economic competitiveness ranking twice over the past 2 years, based on the data of 2010 and 2011 by the World Economics Forum Global Competitiveness Report. So it's not only chocolate and cheese, it's much more. I come back to that in a while. So in that sense, actually, we think that the lack of natural resources maybe is a blessing in disguise, because we are forced to educate our people well. So I think there we have a commonality. I greatly admire the American tradition when it comes to education. We are forced, therefore, to focus on added value. We import raw materials. By the way, a lot of raw materials are originating also from Nevada, Utah, and elsewhere. Switzerland has ended. When I was in Nevada recently, the governor there told me, Julius, do you know that 95% of Nevada exports end up in Switzerland? That was a surprise to me. In that case, it was particularly precious metals that are refined and traded in Switzerland. Fiscal discipline. Switzerland can be considered as a conservative country. I consider myself to be a conservative citizen, including when it comes to fiscal and monetary policy. Switzerland has been ranked number 1. Forgive me for bragging so much, but it's part of my job, you know. I know you have a more humble and more diplomatic approach to this, but I have to tell you that Switzerland has been ranked number 1 also in the when it comes to economic freedom. Freedom of enterprise is enshrined in our constitution. Now that does not come from us, that comes from the Heritage Foundation and of the Wall Street Journal. Unemployment rate in Switzerland, very low, 2.7%. If you compare with our dear neighboring countries in Europe, it's quite astonishing. I'm personally very concerned as a friend of our dear French and German neighbors and Italian neighbors. I'm really concerned by the huge numbers in unemployment, particularly among the young generations there. So something has to improve. And I have to brag again, but you know, actually this is one speaking point from Manuel Sager, and it is just a fact that on a per capita basis, Switzerland has the most Nobel laureates worldwide. So I think I should stop mentioning these rankings. Let's common challenges between United States and Switzerland. We have also an aging society, which is to a slightly lesser degree also the case in countries like Japan and the United States. However, we have a very strong and solid social security system based on 3 pillars. That in itself would be a topic for maybe for the business school here, so I don't want to bother you with that. We have a very well-functioning healthcare system. I know that, of course, this is an issue in the United States, even in this presidential campaign. We have one of the most effective and efficient health care systems in the world. I must say it is also expensive. We pay quite substantial premiums for that. It goes through private insurance companies, but we have a compulsory health insurance for everybody living in Switzerland for the basic coverage, but the coverage is provided through private insurance companies. Success story, I think we can also say educational system, and I think there is a commonality again, a commonality in a sense that we also attach, like you in the United States, a very high priority to good quality education. If you look at the public funding, all through these years, even during the economic downturn, we have increased public contributions to education. Because as you remember, we have no natural resources. All we have is human resources. We have a very good partnership in education between government and industry when it comes to a dual educational system. We attach very high priority also to what you call vocational training, apprenticeship. I think, and I'm convinced, as I'm mainly an economic and trade diplomat, I'm convinced that the good quality of our vocational apprenticeship training programs are one of the most important secrets of Swiss quality production, going into watchmaking and precision medical instruments and everything else. Unemployment rate, I have said, consequently is low. We also think that the dual educational system helps to provide qualified staff for all sectors of industry, also for the non-university sector, because you know, for in the production process, industrial production process, you also need good quality labor. Also, when it comes to the factory floor. The economic ties between Switzerland and the United States, also some political ties. If you give me a few minutes, I would like to explore on that a little bit. We have about 560 Swiss companies with a very strong presence in the United States. These companies, through Swiss direct investments in the United States, are employing about 500,000 people in the United States. So Swiss direct investments in the US economy have created 500,000 jobs in the US labor market. These jobs are generally in the higher qualification field. I'm focusing, by the way, I'm representing Switzerland in the 10 states of the Western United States. So I see from San Francisco Bay Area up to Montana, including Honolulu, Hawaii, I see many things, interesting things. It's my duty to visit Honolulu from time to time, by the way. I see a strong presence of Swiss investments in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector. I give you one example. Daniel has heard it already many times, but my favorite example is the substantial investments of one Swiss pharmaceutical company in San Francisco. Genentech, the largest biotechnology company in the world, is 100% part owned by the Roche Pharmaceutical Group from Basel, Switzerland. We also have, but you know, Switzerland, when it comes to international trade, we are a medium-sized player. We are number 15 or 16 worldwide. But when it comes to flows of investments, direct investments, we are among the key players. Sometimes we are number 5, 6, 7 worldwide. Depending on the country and on the year, we also sometimes end up as number 1. That even happened in the United States a few years ago, and that had to do with the takeover of Genentech 2.5 years ago. You know, these are quite substantial investments. To give you one example, for the second and final tranche for Genentech, the Roche Group paid $48 billion. So these are quite substantial amounts. This can be considered as an investment in talent in the United States. We are in the midst of a global competition for talent worldwide. Now, we also have a good number of American corporations in Switzerland. Actually, we have roughly 950 American corporations with a presence in Switzerland. It has to do with the central location of the country in Europe, as you know. You are very quickly in Paris or Milano or Munich, out of everywhere. That is an important consideration. Infrastructure is an important consideration. Stability, and when I talk about stability, I don't necessarily mean the lack of violence in the streets. It's more the legal stability, predictability in the regulatory field. Taxation, it's true, it's an argument. If you look closely at the arguments for site selection, taxation comes in as argument number 5, 6, or 7, depending on the industry. It is a consideration, but it's not the major criteria. The most important element that most companies mention when they take a decision to have European head offices in Switzerland is the political, legal, regulatory stability and predictability. And investors don't like surprises, as you know. So we have, for instance, Google with a strong presence in Zurich. We have also Procter & Gamble, IBM, Kraft, Yahoo, and others. Quality of life is also mentioned, by the way. Proximity of ski resorts is certainly an important argument, I'm sure. Shared values between Switzerland and the United States. I would mention two mainly. It's democracy and human rights. I think we have very good cooperation. I've been serving in the United Nations in New York. We have a very strong commonality there. Maybe we, of course, as you know, it's not our tradition and also not within our means to have armed forces in trouble spots in the world. On the other hand, we try to compensate that with a very strong presence in humanitarian aids in trouble spots. As you know, the Geneva Conventions have been established in that city, and also the International Committee of the Red Cross is very active worldwide, which is, by the way, of course, an international institution, but it is chaired by a Swiss. And it's also, we are also one of the major financial sponsors of the International Committee of the Red Cross. We have also very close cooperation with the United States when it comes to the fight against organized crime. This is something that you don't see in the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, but I tell you, it is a very successful, close cooperation there. And the relevant services in the United States are extremely happy with that successful cooperation. Fight against terrorism, financing of terrorism, very close. This is something you don't see in the media, of course, I hope not, because to be successful, this is very discreet. Very close cooperation when it comes to the design of targeted financial sanctions. I have been myself involved with my US colleagues at the United Nations in New York to put forward proposals for targeting sanctions more to the regimes and to try to spare as much as possible the innocent population in these countries. Maybe a word also to Switzerland as a financial center. This is something you read in the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. That would be a subject for an evening lecture. It's a complex issue, but of course you know that the Swiss Financial Center is mainly known in the media through what is called banking secrecy, which is more or less a myth, certainly, since quite many years. But I can elaborate on that also during the question and answer session if you want. But contrary to popular belief, in the Swiss economy taken together, the GDP share of financial sector activities, including insurance, including reinsurance, including advice and counsel, and including banking, makes roughly 10% of Swiss GDP, which is a lot. But there are countries that have a much higher share there. So contrary to popular belief, Switzerland has a very strong industrial and manufacturing sector still, and a very successful one. Has to do mainly with high value-added products, high precision machinery, and measuring devices, and so on. And also food, by the way. Nestle is also Swiss companies. The roots of the contentious issues that we have when it comes to the Swiss Financial Center are actually down to one remaining open issue, and that is the legal distinction between tax fraud and tax evasion. That is history. We have done away with that distinction. Tax evasion is not tolerated anymore as a business model. We are in the process of finalizing the agreement also with the United States. It has not yet been signed. We have already concluded 44 double taxation agreements that settles the issue with other countries. And the final negotiations with the US administration are still ongoing, and we hope to conclude that quite soon. The Swiss Financial Center and the Swiss economy in general have actually sailed through the latest financial economic crisis in very good shape. I'm sorry to brag again, but it is a fact that of the roughly 300 banking institutions in Switzerland, only one bank had to be rescued with the assistance of national central bank and government. Only one. And it happens also to be the one, by far the largest one. And it happens to be, and this is really the irony of that issue, it happens to be the only bank that in the 90s took a conscious decision to scale down the Swiss tradition of banking and assume a more Anglo-Saxon international style of investment banking. And it's the only bank that had to be rescued. It's a huge irony. I hasten to add that the bank in the meantime is in very good shape again and is sailing quite successfully, again with a very good new management. So actually, I don't want to go into details there, but I just, in one sentence, we have a policy, the Swiss government, we have a policy of not accepting undeclared assets anymore in Swiss financial institutions. I have seen Swiss banks operating in Frankfurt, Germany, with Frankfurt, as you know, is the banking center of continental Europe. We like to believe it's Zurich, but if it comes to commercial banking in general, Frankfurt is the most important banking center in Europe. And I have seen not all, but let's say certainly all major Swiss banks with a strong presence in Frankfurt, doing business in Germany and sometimes covering the whole of Europe from there, working under the fullest supervision of the German supervisory authorities, including the tax authorities. They did a very good job. I'm convinced we don't need and we don't want to have a banking model purely focusing on tax optimization. By the way, this issue of tax evasion will be automatically resolved also with the United States when we sign the double taxation agreement with the United States soon. And what this FATCA, that would again be another topic. The requirement of reporting all transactions involving American corporations and also in American bonds and shares will automatically deal with the issue of tax evasion also. One thing that perhaps will be surprising to you is sometimes you find also Swiss banks involved in corrupt dictators' funds. Perhaps since you are experts in international relations, I'm sure you have heard about such cases from Nigerian generals from Nigeria having hundreds of millions of dollars in London and in Swiss banks. Not only in Swiss banks, also in London. Or you may remember the Marcos case, the Philippines. Now with the Arab Spring, we see dictators, former leaders, by the way, very respected leaders that have been strategic partners also of this great country, have been received in the White House almost every year. Now, overnight, some of these individuals are considered to be unwanted and former dictators. They have been partners a few years ago. Now they are dictators and corrupt dictators. Now we have taken very swift action in this regard. Actually, the Washington-based Council on Hemispheric Atmospheres has actually stated just a few months ago that the Swiss financial center is actually now a corrupt politician's worst nightmare. We have a new legislation in place that allows us, the government, to take very swift action against corrupt people and corrupt dictators, and we do it. It is not known. We still have the stigma of helping to hide a menace of corrupt dictators, but it is simply untrue. Simply untrue. I'm glad to elaborate on that at another occasion, and I think maybe I should just, looking at my Swiss watch, I should stop now, and maybe we have 10 minutes or so for a question and answer, if you like. It's voluntary, huh? As Churchill said, it's voluntary. Thank you very much.
Please raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you, and then tell us, if you're a student, your name and what you're studying. First question, please.
There's one here.
Should I stand up? You mentioned with the Social Security system, the 3 pillars.
Yeah.
I'm an accounting major, so I take a lot of interest in those topics. Could you kind of briefly go over the 3 pillars of the Social
Yes.
Security system?
Thank you very much. The 3 pillars consist in the following. Pillar number 1 is actually the main pillar of the Social Security provision. It is compulsory. Everybody pays a same percentage of the full salary that goes into a money pool of the Social Security system. It is Social Security. It has a Social Security system character because if you earn more than, if you earn let's say $1 million per year, you pay your percentage from the full 1 million. If you earn only $10,000 a year, you only pay the same amount, same percentage. So that is a solidarity character between the higher income and the lower income in that system. However, the premiums are designed, the payouts at the age of 65 would cover only, let's say, the basic living costs. It's a relatively modest amount. Actually, it's quite substantial. It's in the area of 2,000 Swiss francs per month, if you have contribute the full 44-year contributions. Second pillar has a more private character. It is compulsory also for the employees and the employers to pay into a second pillar, old age provision. The legislation foresees that it is compulsory, but only up to a certain amount. Most companies go well beyond the minimal amount required by the legislation, and that actually will end in a pension, a second pension, that will help you to maintain the same quality of life, same living customs that you had while you were gainfully earning. And the third pillar is actually nothing more than a tax incentive to earn even more. To save even more in a second pillar, and it's to some degree tax deductible. So it's a more tax incentive kind of thing. I will be more than happy to send you a link to a web page or a brochure on that. As a business major, it's good to know about it because, you know, it has to do with employment costs and personnel costs. Yeah. And it works very well. We have, you know, the second pillar is the most important one in terms of money. And one thing actually is important to note. The Switzerland, together with the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, are the only European countries that have resolved that problem issue through a capitalized system. So the second pillar is capitalized, fully capitalized, and so there are no surprises. So it's not, you know, that is the problem with our dear and highly respected neighbors, you know, in Europe, Italy, France, Germany also, I have to say. They load the obligation to pay these generous premium upon future generations, which is not a good idea. To say it diplomatically, it's not a very good idea. It's unfair. It's unfair, at least, that, and I don't want to use other terminology on that. And the United States, of course, good example. In the United States, I think these similar type of private corporation employers, pension funds, I hope and I believe they are also to some degree capitalized. Well, I have California in mind. When you can imagine that very frequently I'm also in Sacramento, the capital of California. Of course, you know that is a big problem. You know, if you talk about the deficit of the state of California, the pension obligations are not even included. So maybe, I think, yeah, I would be ready for a compromise there if I had to defend the American pension fund system there. That is, unfortunately, particularly the public pension funds, I see too much undercapitalized pension funds, particularly when it comes to the public services. Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry I didn't see who was first, but maybe you can just start there.
My name's Clayton Wadsworth. I'm a Chinese major with a German minor. I was wondering what the stance of Switzerland is on immigration. I know in the States we have a big problem, and I know also other countries in Europe they have a problem with immigration. What is Switzerland's stance or procedures with immigration?
Yeah.
You mentioned that you have 23% of the country's foreign.
That's a very good question also. Well, it's a big topic. Huh? Switzerland, maybe it would sound a little bit ridiculous to you, but for us, the figure of 8 million people in our small country is a very high number. For you, it's nothing. But we have seen a strong increase in population in Switzerland. It has to do with the economic success story. We have very many highly qualified people from Germany, for instance, coming to Switzerland for work, medical doctors, researchers, university professors. Now, how can you define the policy on that? Basically, we can say we have quite a strong pressure on immigration in Switzerland. Now, the policy, very briefly, we can say that in our relations with the European Union, which I did not want to go into, that will be another evening. As you know, we are not members of the European Union. However, we have a number of bilateral agreements with the European Union, including the free movement of people, services, not all services, but capital and goods. Now that has been highly contested in the Swiss population, to grant free movement of people to all European Union countries where the unemployment rate is so high, and we are doing quite well there. But it has been accepted also by the people. mainly through an economic argumentation that it is good for our economy to be able to bring in the best and brightest worldwide. Now we have to give priority to the European Union member countries for the reasons I have explained. It means that other countries outside the European Union had to be given a kind of a second priority, and there we have to work with kind of a quota system. Obviously, we try to apply the quota system on a cantonal state level, mainly also on sensible economic criteria. I must admit that. Most companies, of course, want to use these slots or the quota numbers for relevant qualified individuals. And then, of course, we have, when it comes to the asylum policy, that is outside this quota system. We have, I think we can say that we have a very generous, still have had a very generous immigration policy when it comes to refugees from the Balkan countries. You know, when I was young, we had a strong immigration from Italy, and then from Portugal. Then now we have more, Sri Lanka. Then now we have, in more recent years, mainly from the Balkan countries, Serbia, Croatia, all these countries. Yeah, it is a complex topic, but that would be the simple answer. Thank you. Maybe we have seen there.
Going back to Social Security, in the United States, in my generation, a lot of us have a bad public opinion of Social Security, and we're worried that we won't actually receive any of the benefits that are getting taken out of our paychecks. And I was wondering, in Switzerland, what's the general public opinion of Social Security?
Yeah, we also hear sometimes, voices from the people, and that, maybe we better save privately, because who knows how long we get the Social Security checks when we are in the beyond 65. We have seen a problem in one segment of the Social Security system, a projection for the next year, and that is the disability pension. That is part of the Social Security scheme, because interestingly enough, from the immigrant population, we have seen, I don't want to make a value judgment here, but we have seen, it's just a fact, that from the immigrant population from the Balkan countries, we have seen a huge increase in applications for disability pension from relatively young people. That has led to a gap, in a predictable gap in that part. Now we have submitted to the people that we have to slightly increase the contributions to cover that potential gap, and the people have approved. And actually, it happened to visit the then Governor Schwarzenegger in California, in Sacramento, just a few weeks after that popular vote to agree to an increase in contribution. I mentioned that to Governor Schwarzenegger, that his people, by the way, have just agreed to increase contributions. And then Schwarzenegger said, "What? The Swiss agreed to increase taxes? That's impossible." But so we are trying to take care in a pragmatic way, predictable problems, and that until now I think the system is in relatively good shape. For the second pillar, which is the most important, that is out of any discussion, because these are capitalized funds, and the members, the pensioners, just get what they paid in, what the corporation paid in, and the returns that have been produced through the investment portfolios. So there is no political hickhack on that. It's more an entitlement that you really have earned in second pillar. But it is also, it is an issue. Some people are worried that maybe in 20 years we have more problems in getting Social Security. I'm sorry, I believe you have been there, lady.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm studying political science. So I was very interested when you mentioned how if the parliament makes a decision and the popular vote disagrees, that they can overturn the parliament, I believe you had said. So I was curious, how often does that happen? And it's interesting to me because I think in America, a lot of the approval rating for our Congress is at like 9 or 10% right now. Very, very low approval. But I think that it's an interesting idea that the people could overturn decisions made by the parliament. So how often does that happen? And do you think that people in Switzerland are more in tune with what their government is doing and are thus more likely to act and to overturn them? Or is it more that people know what's going on, but they're not very involved with the decisions?
Yeah. That's a very good question again. Now, there are changes in legislation and, of course, in the Constitution where you have a mandatory referendum, where certain issues have to be submitted to a popular referendum in the first place. Anything having to do with joining supranational international organizations has to be submitted. That is why, unlike in most other European countries, the government cannot just say we join the European Union. We have to convince the majority of the people and the states to do that. Now that these referenda are quite rare, but you see an increasing number of initiatives where a group of citizens, 100,000 citizens, sign an initiative for anything. They just want to have a solution to a problem. That happens quite frequently. If that happens, the government usually, or the parliament, is motivated or feels obligated maybe to submit a better, a more practical proposal, which they would not have submitted if the people would not have taken the initiative. And sometimes then the people decide, when it comes to the popular vote, sometimes the people would then opt for the proposal by the government because it is submitted as a more practical solution. But it also happens that the people's initiative is. I give you one example. You know, we had this, I must say, I'm also a citizen, a voting citizen of my country, so I say we had a silly. Sometimes it happens also that they have silly proposals, let's be frank. Now, you probably remember that we had an initiative that has actually banned the construction of minarets in Switzerland. It doesn't resolve any problem. It only creates unrest, and it's just a silly proposal. Unfortunately, the majority of the people felt, and most of them were surprised that it was adopted. They wanted to give a message to the government to take some issues of immigration more seriously. We had, unfortunately, just prior to the vote, we had some incidents, violent incidents, very dramatic incidents involving the relevant community. I have served twice in Islamic countries, and I have a high degree of respect for the culture. Now, the end result is, you know, we have 5 mosques in Switzerland with minarets. So these minarets will remain, and new mosques can be built, no problem, open-ended, but without minarets. So, I mean, this is not the outcome that you would expect. So sometimes we also have to live with an imperfect outcome when it comes to direct democracy. May I suggest that I send you a wonderful documentation that we produced for our events in San Francisco and in Sacramento and in Portland, Oregon, and also in Seattle, comparing the Swiss tradition of direct democracy with the American experience with direct democracy. You would find a much better answer there, and also very nicely illustrated documentation. maybe I can leave you my email here, and I would be happy to send you that documentation. Thank you. I believe I am already 5 minutes over. I don't want to destroy the Swiss reputation for timeliness here, but I want to thank you again for your interest, and always welcome in San Francisco if you are there, and if you have nothing better to do, you call the Swiss Consul General. Our residence has a view to the Golden Gate and to the Pacific Ocean at the same time, and Ursula, I didn't consult with her, but she makes the best coffee and the best pastry in town. Thank you very much.